So far, we have focused most of our attention on policy instruments that change prices. However, in some cases, regulators may wish to resort to other types of policies. First, one can think of soft paternalism, such as awareness campaigns and nudges. We speak of nudges when one tries to influence behavior by changes to the choice structure without changing the incentives, for example, offering different default options. Second, one can think of command and control type of policies, where a regulator introduces production standards or bans on the use of some substances. It seems almost needless to say that the optimal policy mix will depend on the situation and the type of pollution. Between 2015 and 2018, the introduction of a disposable plastic bag ban, followed by a tax in the city of Chicago, offered an interesting natural experiment that enabled Homonov and colleagues to compare the effectiveness of a ban versus a tax. The authors compared disposable bag use in Chicago under the different regulations with shoppers in the suburbs that did not fall under the regulation, where bag use data was gathered with the help of data collectors at 12 different store locations, counting bags of about 2,000 customers in each location. The initial plastic bag ban introduced the ban on lightweight plastic bags only in August 2015. It was repealed in November 2016, and shortly after, in January 2017, a tax of 7 cents was introduced on all disposable bags. Homonov and colleagues found that the plastic bag ban was relatively ineffective in reducing disposable bag use. The ban mostly led to substitution to heavier plastic bags or paper bags. The tax, on the other hand, managed to reduce disposable bag use by about a third. Homonov and colleagues point out that bans are commonly only placed on a specific range of products or materials, allowing for this substitution to take place, where it is often easier to set a tax across different products, materials, or applications. Perhaps the most attractive aspect to the pricing option is that it is liberty preserving, or at least depending on income. That is, people also express concern over distributional aspects of carbon pricing or water pricing. A paper by Maastre Andrés and colleagues explored the public acceptability of carbon taxes. It seems that there is a gap between economists' their advocacy of carbon pricing and the hesitancy of general public to embrace it. This gap may be explained in part by the idea of double dividend. Maestre Andrés and colleagues describe the double dividend hypothesis as double dividend refers to recycling carbon pricing revenues by reducing distortionary taxes, for example, labor taxes, income taxes, which may have positive impacts on economic growth, employment, and technological development. In other words, the first dividend is the efficiency gain from reducing externalities with the carbon tax. This tax generates government revenues which can be used to lower distortionary taxes on things we think are good, such as labor, hence the double dividend. Yet, Maestre Andrés and colleagues also write that people are skeptical about this idea of double dividend of environmental tax reform because people do not trust that government will actually do as promised. The idea of double dividend and revenue recycling can also be found in Stiglitz and colleagues, where they underlined that climate change policy and poverty reduction can be achieved simultaneously. Quoting from page 39, data from developing countries also suggests that taking $100 away from fossil fuel subsidies and redistributing that money equally among the population would on average transfer 13 US dollars to the bottom quintile and take 23 US dollars away from the top quintile. Unfortunately, reducing fossil fuel subsidies is easier said than done in practice. Maestre Andres and colleagues describe several protests in response to proposed carbon pricing, including Yellow Vest protest in France of 2018 and reversal of carbon pricing in Australia due to public pressure in 2014. More recently, we have seen protests in Ecuador that announced to cut fossil fuel subsidies, but reintroduced the subsidies after protests led to a state of emergency. Around the same time, there were also protests over cuts in fossil fuel subsidies in Iran. While prices increased steeply, they remained amongst the lowest in the world. As far as I know, Iran did not budge to the protest. Rather, the protests are reported to have been squashed violently, giving an estimated death toll exceeding 1,000 people. Maestre Andres and colleagues, their review suggested that people were most concerned over distributional aspects of carbon pricing, yet tax redistribution was not the most favored use of funds. Rather, most respondents seem to favor the earmarking of funds to be used in environmental projects. Despite this earmarking behavior being known to reduce efficiency of public spending, according to Maestre Andres and colleagues, some studies linked people favoring environmental earmarking with distrust in governments, as earmarking constrains policy making and thus functions as a credible commitment device. In summary, we have started today with an illustration that biodiversity conservation requires us to address climate change. One of the main ingredients of climate policy is to introduce prices for greenhouse gas emissions, either directly through taxation or indirectly through creating markets for emission rights. We have seen that discount rates largely determine the social cost of carbon estimates, and that these estimates are the result of a cost-benefit approach to carbon pricing. These models suffer from the need to make strong assumptions about the economic damages from climate change, and recently others have proposed cost-effectiveness alternatives. Despite the warning by Aldi and colleagues for the vulnerability of cost-effectiveness-based estimates to the political reality of the day, I argue that these estimates are at least complementary and could possibly be preferred. Also, the aversion against cost-effectiveness estimates is odd when judged from the biodiversity conservation literature, where cost-effectiveness estimates dominate the literature, as we will read more about next week. Finally, we have discussed some comparison of pricing versus command and control type of policies. This brief review meant to highlight that policy effects depend on behavioral response rather than taking sides against command and control type of policies. I believe that technical standards and bans can be complementary to carbon pricing, and that there can be good arguments to set maximum weights to passenger cars or ban the use of plastic fishing nets. We close today with a figure from one of the opening slides in full. The figure taken from our Rolton data and produced by Andrews, based on the Global Carbon Project and IPCC, depicts emission reduction pathways to net zero that are still consistent with keeping warming to below 1.5 degrees. I could not fit all references of today on one slide, so here is the first part. And here you can see the second half of references that I used for today's lecture. Next week in Environmental Economics, we dig deeper into the valuation of nature and ecosystem services. Thank you for your attention. In case you like any of the videos, feel welcome to share or subscribe. Hope to see you back for the next lecture.